I went in thinking, well, this is high science. And this is some of the most important information that anybody could ever share with someone. And I went to the very first big symposium in this particular field, and I was astounded at what I saw. It was the opposite. You might say that doctors might be the most underserved educational demographic that there is when you consider all the different influences, or you might say demands, on their time. So how in the world do you do everything you're supposed to do and stay on top of it?
Today on Inspiring Business Leaders, we have Rick Davis, President and CEO of Arbor Scientia Group.
We could change the way medical education is done in the world. And if we could do that, what a noble cause that would be, because then clinicians would be better equipped to do what they do, and ultimately then the patient would end up with a higher quality of care.
What do you do that's magical for these people? How does it work? Today on Inspiring Business Leaders, we have Rick Davis, President and CEO of Arbor Scientia Group. Rick, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So you're known as the master of communication, right?
Maybe in my own mind, but
Well, you have quite a colorful background of speaking to various industries, top level executives, scientists, doctors. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in this industry and where you're going now.
well, it really was a rather circuitous route. I worked in the automotive industry in the beginning, and actually started in men's clothing. And the thing that got me interested in how people communicate was we were with a young company that was just exploding in growth. And we were building stores and training people to manage those stores as fast as we could. And I started to wonder, what is it that helps somebody learn something they have to learn more quickly, and then to the point where they understand it and they can utilize and apply it? And because my first job was to train these managers going into new stores, so that was the first thing that kind of got me interested on what is it about the way things are done that would help you or I learn something more quickly and then be able to apply it. So did that in that particular job. I worked in the auto industry a little bit, where I developed some training programs for different positions, and then worked with the automobile manufacturers after that in many times training their automotive show speakers, or they would call them spokespeople or product specialists, and how to present the product and how to engage with people. And from that then ran into a person I had known in high school, and he had just finished writing a textbook in a very high science type field, psychopharmacology. I couldn't even spell it at that point. And what we started to explore was, he had written a textbook. He was being asked to come speak all over the world. I had a training consulting company, and we work with, as you mentioned earlier, C-suite individuals in many instances on their understanding the communication dynamic on their team, and then how important that communication was, because for many of them, their careers may be made or broken on a presentation they made to the board or to the shareholders or whatever. And so to work with them to understand how they could be more effective in those situations. And so we were kind of catching up. And because he was, my co-founder was being invited to speak all over the world, he asked me to come be his communication coach. Well, that should be fun. I never worked in medicine before. Should be interesting. And that's really what got me launched into working in the field of medicine. And I have to say, as you and I were chatting a little bit beforehand, I went in with a very naive perspective. I went in thinking, well, this is high science. And this is some of the most important information that anybody could ever share with someone. So I'm going to see, this will be exciting. I'm going to see cutting edge adult learning, cutting edge communication science application. This is going to be a thrill. And I went to the very first big symposium in this particular field, and I was astounded at what I saw. It was the opposite. And so you might say that doctors might be the most underserved educational demographic that there is when you consider all the different influences, or you might say demands, on their time. So there's managed care demanding certain things are done a certain way. There's all the regulations. And then, of course, there's the explosion of new developments and new information and new technology. So how in the world do you do everything you're supposed to do and stay on top of it? So that's kind of when he and I started to look at that, and I realized that those things weren't being applied in this field. We both kind of hit the same spot of inspiration, if you want to call it that. That was the flashpoint for, here's an opportunity. We could change in our own way. We could change the way medical education is done in the world. And if we could do that, what a noble cause that would be, because then clinicians would be better equipped to do what they do. And ultimately, then the patient would end up with a higher quality of care.
Hmm. That is fascinating, certainly. So what I want to know from that is, how do you do it? And if you can share maybe a story or two of somebody that needed help in their communication style, public speaking. What do you do that's magical for these people? How does it work?
Well, I think, I mean, let's face it, there are lots of people who are uh, public speaking coaches or have a business in helping people improve their public speaking. We took maybe a more specialized route and having to do with the particular challenges in the medical field and the demands to be successful in that. And to your story, or your question about a story that comes to mind, I mean, when somebody can overcome what I would say overcome culture to become a more effective communicator, that's significant. And many times it's just kind of understanding some of the principles at play and what makes somebody want to listen to you. And we were working with a physician from Norway. And beforehand, we were talking a little bit, and he was talking about in their education program as a kid, when the teacher would call on the student, you simply raised your hand, you stepped out of your desk, you stood up with your hands at your side, you looked straight ahead, not at anybody, and you gave the answer, and you sat down and you folded your hands. And so that was kind of the mindset that he operated on when he was speaking in front of a group of doctors. Very kind of staid, very little emotion. And we started to talk about what makes somebody want to listen to you. Why would you want to listen to you? And it was amazing to watch the transformation when somebody realizes it's all about connection. And what can you do that would allow somebody to make a connection with you, or that you can, that you can make a connection around. And he had mentioned that his grandmother was really close to him, and he was close to her, and that he'd spent a lot of time with her. So I asked him to tell me a couple stories about his grandmother, and he started to think about how things she had taught him influenced him in what he did today as a doctor. And at the end of some of the training, he stood up to make his final presentation. And instead of being very staid and kind of emotionless, it was amazing because he relayed to the audience this story about his grandmother and the influence she had on him and what it meant to him. And you could see the audience transform in front of him. And of course, he saw that happen, and it impacted him as well. And it was like watching a different person. And so that's one of the things that I think about when somebody says, can you think of an example where somebody almost changes right before your eyes because they've understood to be real and to be vulnerable, to be genuine is kind of the key, or you might say the secret ingredient to really effective communication.
And that could probably be hard for a lot of people, a lot of smart people, powerful people, to be vulnerable, to be empathetic, to build that connection. And I'm not saying that because they're bad people. I don't know if they've been trained that way necessarily in the system. So somebody comes to you, they're powerful, they have a big presentation, and are these people nervous, or are they wanting to connect? Like, what do they come to you with that you're like, okay, here's step 1 through 5, what we need to do right now?
Well, I think that's a great question. What do they come to you with? Actually, it's a myriad of different perspectives and or attitudes, I guess I would say. So some may come thinking, what are you going to teach me? I've been speaking for 25 years. I'm one of the world's leading authorities on this. So, what are you going to teach me? And then to the flip side of that, you have one of those people who are just simply outstanding people, and they may be the world's leading authority in a particular topic, but they are so humble and they're so interested in helping others understand that they'll do whatever you tell them to do. And in fact, you brought up a great point, Rick, when you said maybe they haven't been trained that way. And really, if you stop to think about that, most of us haven't been. So did anybody tell you early in your career that one of the things that you should pay tremendous attention to is your verbal communication skills or even your written communication skills? People tell you should be looking at your grades, you'd be thinking about, what's your IQ rating, on and on and on. But they don't talk about how important that communication skill is. And it doesn't matter what your endeavor is in life, that's going to be a critical element, whatever you choose to pursue. So I think for many of them, the fact that you could actually deliver some value in helping them how to tell their story more effectively, whatever that story might be, that's when people start to get excited about what you have to offer and what that difference can make. And so, again, like I said, you can see almost every kind of attitude and perspective. But I think to the point about not being trained that way, if you've never been trained, you don't know what you're missing. You don't know how much more effective you could be had you been exposed to some of those principles and been able to apply them. Because you'll see, I think the cool thing about that, when you're in front of an audience and you maybe try something that you haven't done before, and you see immediately the response on the faces of your audience, it's pretty nice because it's almost immediate confirmation that that was the right thing to do and some motivation to continue to try.
Yeah. Are you a public speaker yourself?
Yes.
Do you get nervous?
Absolutely.
Do people that go to the TED Talks or these big speeches, or even performers, what is that feeling like before you're backstage or seeing the crowd peek around the corner and you're like, oh man, I gotta go. How do you push yourself out there?
Well, I don't know that I worry so much about pushing myself out there, but I think that's a question that people ask all the time. People ask, well, you've been doing this for decades. Do you still get nervous? And for me, the minute I don't get a little bit nervous, I think it's going to be time to quit. Because I think if you're not nervous, to me, it's an indicator that there's not enough care and or emotion behind it to kind of keep that edge that allows you to want to bring the best, that allows you to want to polish the way things are done, make it easy for the audience to understand. And if you can't do that, I think that the knowledge that you're trying to share is diminished in value, because until you can impart that to others so they have a grasp of it, so that they understand, it really doesn't, its true value, I don't think, is recognized.
Talk to me about the three most important aspects of being a good public speaker, whether that's voice inflection, storytelling, a great intro. Like, how do you rate that? How do you say these are the three things that made that speaker really impactful?
Well, the first one I would mention is probably not one that's on a whole lot of people's list, because I think they start their list a little further down the road. You'll see what I mean by that in a minute. When you talk about preparation, people are going to prepare themselves, they're going to prepare their content, whatever visuals or whatever they might use. And I think a lot of times the missed step in that is that they don't prepare their audience. So, and what I mean by that is, especially in the medical world, many of the venues that would be used for passing on information would be like a dinner meeting. So you might have between 5 and you might have a big one that might be 50 or 100 or maybe sometimes even more. And what typically happens is the speaker would be introduced, they come out and they launch off on their presentation, and there's been very little to no interaction with the audience. So where's the connection? And if when somebody's sitting in an audience, and it doesn't matter whether the audience is 1 or 1,000, there's going to be 3 questions that the person is asking you about you if you're the presenter. They're going to say, do you care about me? Can you help me? And can I trust you? And their answers to those questions will be derived more by what they observe about you than what they hear from you. So if it's about getting a yes answer to do you care about me, what is it that would show somebody in the audience that you care? Well, some of it is, did you interact with, if you cared about them, did you interact with them before you did your presentation? Or did you just kind of, launch off into it? And I think that that's one of the things, if you watch really great speakers, there's some interaction. I'll give you an example of it. I'm sure you're familiar with Ken Blanchard, one of the most prolific business authors of our era. And Ken is a perfect walking example of that. I was at a breakfast meeting, and I wanted to get there early because I knew it was going to be packed and I wanted to get a decent seat. So I got there early and I sat down front, and I'm sitting there, and I turn around to look in the back, and I see somebody walk in the door and come walking up, and I'm watching him walk. And at this point, he was, I think, in his mid to late 70s and not as mobile as some people. But here's somebody who's one of the world's leading authorities on business. He doesn't have to come talk to anybody in the audience beforehand. But I turned around and looked, and he came and sat down at the table, and there were a couple other of us at the table, and he spent probably 10 or 15 minutes before his presentation started just kind of shooting the breeze and talking to us, finding out about us, making a connection. And that, to watch somebody at that level take the time to do that, I think is pretty important. And so there's a lesson to be learned there. And you can feel it when he spoke to the audience then, because he did not just our table, but a couple other tables too before he started. That's a different dynamic created in that audience than when somebody doesn't do that. So that's one of the things that if you really want to make a connection with the audience so they're receptive to the information you're going to share, I think that's a critical element, and it's missed by most people. Or I would say it's given kind of short shrift, in the overall scheme of things. The other part of that, you mentioned storytelling, and, before the printed word, that's how information was passed on. And so to become a master storyteller, or to understand the component pieces of your story, their relationship to each other, and then how you want to string them together to make it an effective story and one that will accelerate somebody's understanding, I think that's an important part. And a lot of times that's understanding how to use certain principles or I'll say tools that would help you link the different pieces together. And if you're trying to impart understanding then how it is that you create an easy learning path for somebody. And that's not something that a lot of people are exposed to. And I would say that many times in the industry, in the medical industry, the people who put together the presentations don't necessarily keep that in mind. And in fact, if you look at, because everything has to go through medical, legal, and regulatory review, many times the life gets sucked out of it because they're concerned about regulations, and it makes it less instructive or less easy to learn from than it could be.
Yeah, it could be a little dry, a little boring for the audience.
Yeah,
even if they're interested in it, right? So how do you make that more interesting? But I want to go back to you. So you told me well, I want to know where this passion comes from, and if grade school or a parent or a sibling. Like, when you were growing up, did you know you would be doing this sort of thing, or were there little threads in your elementary, high school, college days that said, hey, I don't mind being on the stage. I want to inspire people to speak better. I want to work helping explain complex processes in eloquent ways. Like, tell me a bit more about that. Maybe we could even go before the apparel experience.
That's I don't know that I've had somebody ask that question quite that way. But you just provoked me to think about some things I hadn't thought about for quite a while. Um, my immediate response to that was, yeah, no, I can't think of any. But there were a couple things that I thought were fascinating. So in high school, maybe the first taste of it was I was one of the captains on the football team, and we had a big game coming up, and the coach asked me to speak at the pep rally. And I was thinking about all the other people that had done that and how they're kind of sometimes same old, same old. They're kind of mundane. And I thought, well, I really don't want to do that. I'd like to do something different. So I started thinking about my teammates, and really the presentation became about all the different teammates that I had and the specific or unique characteristic that they brought to the team that made the team, a sum total greater than the individual pieces. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that'll be different. And as I'm talking about that and watching the audience, I was amazed at the response from the audience. And then afterwards, even amazed by the response of my teammates to that. So I thought, why people get all cranked up about that? I mean, that was pretty interesting, because people were excited.
Mm-hmm.
And so it set me on a path to look at what is it about what you say or how you say it, which is maybe the more critical element of it, that makes something resonate with somebody. And then later in high school, we had another little play or whatever, had a small part in it. And again, with just some enthusiasm and the way that things were presented, people got excited about that. And then I don't think the next exposure to it that I had a speech class in college, and I was talking about some friends who had been in the Peace Corps. And when they came back from Africa, they were like different people. And I was talking about, they told me the stories that they had and the experiences that they had. And those were some things that I was relating to the people in the speech class. And people were just all cranked up about all of a sudden the Peace Corps. And I wasn't in the Peace Corps. I hadn't been in the Peace Corps, but I was just relating a story about friends that I knew that were. And you could see that how certain, we'll call it themes, struck a chord with different people and how they responded to it. So that it wasn't like, oh, that makes me want to be a speaker. It was like, that's interesting. I wonder why that happens. But that's about all I thought about it until much later, trying to train and trying to see what you can do to help people learn more quickly. That some of that stuff started to come back about, well, what was it when this happened that made people excited? What was it when this was talked about that made people get enthusiastic about it? So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's great. It makes me also think about like famous politicians and people that make just amazingly impactful speeches, whether it's JFK or MLK or even crazy people like Adolf Hitler or Donald Trump, right? I mean, these are people that have made they really touch their audience, whether they're good or bad people. I'm not here to judge,
Yeah.
okay? But what is it about some of the most powerful speakers, those speeches we still watch today and take notes on? What are those people doing in those speeches that still compel us today, even if they talked about something from antiquity? But those still, I'm sure you might look at some of those playbooks from some of these impactful speeches and say, what was it about those people that really got on these huge global stages and made impacts, whether good or bad for the world? What did they bring to their presentation?
Well, I think I think there are a couple kind of secret ingredients that an audience has a ability to read almost instantaneously. And some of that, I think, is the genuineness or the authenticity of the people of the person speaking, I think then also whether somebody has feigned passion or real passion comes through, and I think it's fairly easy for most audiences to read whether that's real or not. And I think that when somebody has the vulnerability to be passionate about something that's important to them, that's something that resonates with an audience. And again, like I said, I think those are the things that are indicators of authenticity, of genuineness. And I think those are some of the secret ingredients that audience respond to very strongly. And I think if you go back and take a look at some of the most profound or hard-hitting presentations, I'm sitting here trying to think of one that would display or demonstrate that many times it's not the words that are said. And the one that comes to mind is, the famous address that Churchill made, where he basically it was 6 words: never, 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 never quit. And he walked off the stage. And so, what did that do to the audience? Did the message get across? In a time when lots of people needed it. That's, to me, that's profound. So there's no pretense, there's no facade, there's no, fancy vocabulary that's used. It's all about, the commitment, the passion, the vulnerability that somebody displays.
Well, I could talk about public speaking all day because it's a fascinating topic. I do want to bring it back to your company, Arbor, and I want to talk a little bit. I watched a video recently that you put out on LinkedIn, sort of about your methodology, working from the goal backwards. Like, what are you trying to get across to your audience? Who are you speaking to? Why are you speaking to them? What they should take away? Could you tell me a little bit more about what you do in your company to help life science companies be better communicators?
Yeah. So again, as I said, I think that many times today's healthcare professionals might be the most underserved demographic group from an educational standpoint when you think about the demands on their time, the challenges they have on their plate, and then just the explosion of information and technology today. And one of the things that we want to do and that we've set out to do, like I said, is to change the way medical education was done and to bring in things that we've learned from communication science, from adult learning, even instructional design, that would help somebody in a relatively short period of time ramp up their understanding to the point where they felt comfortable with it. So we'll help a particular company with a product that they have. Maybe they have a new pharmaceutical product. And of course, then healthcare professionals will need to know about it, all the different aspects, how to use it, what's the right patient. And while that's not really different than a lot of other companies that do the very same thing, our approach towards that, I think, is what is different. And so many times, I think in the industry, because it is complex science, and many times I think people think content is king. So it's all about getting the science right. And if you do that, you're all set. And unfortunately, that might not be it at all. And in fact, you can have great science behind it, but if that story is not put together in a way that we were just talking about, where the component pieces, kind of know their relationship to each other and how you're going to string that all together to help somebody accelerate their path up the learning curve, well, then you're going to be less effective than you could be, and people are going to walk away with less. And I think that's one of the things that's happened, actually, in the field, is that because there's so much information out there, somebody could go to, and you might call a medical education dinner, maybe almost every night of the week except for Mondays and Fridays. So there's no lack of that. And so what there is a lack of, I think, in many instances, is value received per educational time spent. So they walk in expecting to walk out with the nuggets they need to go apply it the next day and maybe raise the level of care they give their patients. But what ends up happening is it's presented in a dry, kind of unengaging way. And so you lose people's interest. And let's face it, I mean, one of the things that's happened that's made communication more difficult today is the impact that technology has had. Because we're so used to getting sound bites, right? And if you take a look at what's happened to the average adult attention span, for example, in North America, we see it, continue to wane. And people are learning differently now. And so instead of in the past, where the world's information wasn't available to us with a couple keystrokes, we used to have to dig and do research to find it and to grasp the additional facts and then kind of get to a conceptual understanding of things. And people in many instances now are just kind of superficial learning.
Sensory overload, maybe.
Well,
Has
so I
something to
think
do with
that's some of it too. There's no doubt about it. So what ends up happening is you better bring your A game if you're in front of a live audience, because even if you're good, people are going to take a mental vacation every 5-7 minutes or so in your presentation. So what are you going to do that makes that information interesting to them? And then what are you going to do to help bring them back when they take that little mental trip that people are going to? So to understand, how do you accommodate for all that and then actually try to be a half a step ahead of the audience, so when they walk out, they're thinking, wow, look at that. That was an hour? I can't believe it. It went so fast. And I got this, and this. I know exactly what I want to do. I mean, that's kind of the highest compliment you could ask somebody. So that's the approach we feel like we bring. And then one of the other thing that's a little very different about us right from the very beginning, I can remember asking somebody in one of the first meetings that I went to, what's a successful meeting? So what makes a meeting a success that you're putting on? And I was told that, well, we got people to come. That's a big deal. I said, oh, so butts and seats is the kind of the ultimate measure? And they said, well, no. I said, isn't it important that somebody learned something? They said, yeah. I said, so what do they tell you that they learned? Oh, they said that they learned a lot. Well, like what? Well, and that's kind of the answer you get a lot of times. And we always felt, okay, well, that doesn't work at that time. When I first started working in medicine, that would not work in any other industry. You better be able to say, this is where somebody was. This was the end result of the educational initiative that we put forth. And that wasn't the case in medicine. And so right from the beginning, we started to measure that. We wanted to know, what did somebody know when they walked in the door? What did they know when they left? And then maybe a additional benefit with that would be, where might there still be gaps in their understanding, that if you were going to do another iteration of your educational initiative, that you could pinpoint those gap areas just a little bit more. And I think that was something that was very different than many others in the industry. And actually, we thought it was a great way to serve the audience, that the audience got more if we did that.
Do you help the company set the goals of what they want their attendees to learn? Do you walk them through that and then gear the presentations to be more about the experience and the knowledge that the audience wants to take away versus just talking at the audience?
As much as we can.
I work in life science too, believe me.
Yeah, no.
I always listen to all of our advice as consultants, right?
Right, all the time.
Sometimes they're like, "Oh, that's great. You have this wonderful idea. We're just going to do it our way." But thanks.
Yeah, no, but that's a great point. But you, I mean, that means you have some education of them to do yet, and we know that that's always the case, right? But yeah, to structure it as best you can, and just like you said, sometimes somebody's going to say, okay, that's great, and other times they can say, okay, well, thank you very much, but this is how we're going to do it, and hopefully end up with some type of compromise that's somewhere in the middle. And I think that, that's a frustrating aspect. If somebody is in a certain position and they've never been exposed to some of the education, we'll call it educational aspects that you're talking about, then how would they know that? And if your career is riding on it, you're probably going to go with what's safe or what you know has worked for others.
Mm.
And I think that, you can't blame somebody for that. So to try to, and if I back up for just a second to kind of talk a little bit about how do you help somebody with that situation? If you don't have any data to give somebody that's demonstrated proof of the concepts that you're talking about and how they work, why should they risk something, or why should they believe you?
Mm.
And I think that's one of the reasons that we incorporated Measure, because we wanted to be able to say right from the beginning, okay, I know this is maybe a little different. This is why we do what we do. And along some of the things that go back to when you were asking about differentiation or why we do what we do the way we do it, one of the other things I think that was a little bit different is before we really kind of struck out on our own, we did our own medical education research study to look at what it took to move the needle for people in our field. And we've written articles about it. We wrote my co-author and I, or my co-founder and I, wrote a book together that was published by Cambridge University Press, which is kind of a misleading book, I'll say, in a way, in that it's really a communications book with medical examples to make it more specific and relevant to the field. But the essence of it really is fundamentals of communication that can make you a better communicator and a better educator when it comes to sharing any type of information. So I'm not really sure of anybody else in our field who's really taken that approach. And in fact, it's about time we refresh that book as well. But I think that that's something that's really important, just like we talked about. If you've not been exposed to those types of principles, then you can't really be held responsible for applying them.
Mm. When egos clash, I see you laughing because you know this probably all too well. It's a common thing, I'm sure, in what you're doing. But when egos clash and egos get in the way of you helping somebody, when you know they desperately need it, how do you put your ego aside and do the right thing for the client? Do you give them pushback, and do you say, "Hey, this is something you really need to do to change it up"? Like, how do you negotiate the change when the change is not being taken well? It's kind of a push on my last question, but I guess I'm just asking in terms of like, do you get through to some people when you know it's going to be terrible and you're like, look, I have this good idea. Here's some scientific proof behind why I'm telling you this is going to work better for you. Do they give you some grace and say, okay, all right? Or are you just, swimming upstream?
Sometimes. So no, I think and that obviously shows your knowledge of the field as well, and that you work in that field too. And it'd be nice if you didn't get pushback and that people were really accepting. But I mean, that's not real world, right? You have to expect that type of thing. And I would say that it'd be nice to win more than we do. But actually, I think over the course of time, people kind of look at your track record. I think they'll evaluate that a little bit more, and you may end up winning just a little bit more along those lines than you did in the very beginning. But you can't give up on people. And again, it's kind of what they're exposed to and what their experience has been. But yeah, I mean, you get pushed back, and we'll diplomatically, we'll say, push back a little bit in the beginning to try to gauge where the boundaries are.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the boundaries are not far off. And so there's not a whole lot of pushing that can be done. And if that's the case, well, okay, that might not be the perfect person for that particular concept at that particular point in time. Mm-hmm. And then others, are a little bit more open. And we've found that if we've kind of earned the right, I'll say, through relationship and so forth with somebody to suggest that we try something and even maybe do a bit of a pilot without, a big full-blown initiative. Then if it ends up the way we intended to end up, then they're given some grace, and the next time you ask for or suggest or make a recommendation, maybe you're a little bit more likely to have it accepted. So I think in some of those situations, you have to earn your way into that. But I mean, the reality is, if every time you mention an idea, you got buy-in on it, something's wrong.
Yeah, right. I want to shift gears to technology really quick. Over the past 5 years, 6 years, we had the coronavirus. It shut down the world. I don't know if we've been the same since.
No, I don't.
Coming back up, humanity is just in a short amount of time, we've changed how we live. I mean,
Yeah,
it's so
absolutely.
profound. I think we don't even know quite yet. We're still reeling in the results of shutting the world down, going to VR, going to Zoom, going to all these new texts to communicate, So I want to ask you, because it sounds like you do some content stuff for online, but you also do a lot of in real life. And I would consider you an expert in bridging that gap between the content online and in real life speaker presentations for your industry. How has that changed since, let's say, 2019 to 2020 to 2026?
That's that's a very weighted question.
Watch your shoes on the thing right there. There you go. That's okay.
That's a very weighted question, and I would say that because I agree with you. I don't think we have any idea just how significant the change is, and probably won't for quite a while longer. But we're seeing some things that are evidence of the change. One of the things I think is kind of interesting, I was just talking about doing the next edition of the book I talked about. Well, one of the things that's not in the previous edition is communicating in a virtual environment. And one of the things that was amazing to me when we had to make that shift and everything, it was Zoom or whatever, or Zoom type meeting, that speakers who you would consider to be excellent communicators live and in person, we're now communicating via Zoom or Teams or whatever platform you want to talk about. And they did things on a virtual presentation that they would never dream of doing in front of a live audience. And if you stop to think about, okay, well, that type of a platform would allow that, I'd say it's just the opposite. Because, in fact, why do we call it Zoom fatigue? In the beginning, everybody thought it was kind of a funny term. Maybe it was just a made-up term. It wasn't something real. And then we found out through research that it was. And the impact was because you saw so little of the body language message that you would normally see if it was live communication, that your brain was working hard to be able to fill in the missing information that it wasn't getting. And so when you had meeting after meeting after meeting and your brain was operating at that level, it's no wonder you were tired. And if you've ever spoken in front of an audience, you know that you could speak for, let's say, a half an hour, and you get done if you've really poured yourself into it, and you're spent at the end of just a half an hour. People think, why? Geez, it was only 30 minutes. I was just on stage. I was only talking or maybe walking a little bit. And it's because of the multiple levels that you're operating at. And if you're pouring yourself into that, you're observing the audience and you're thinking about the best way to seize the moment to make an instruction take place. And that's a tax on the brain power that you have. And but if I'm in the audience watching, I can see all your body language message. If I'm on a Zoom meeting, I mean, what do you typically see in a Zoom meeting? You might see their head, maybe you see a little bit of shoulders, but if you look at some of the really good people who are doing virtual meetings, they're not right up in their camera. there's a full body shot, or at least three-quarter, where people can see a lot more of the body language message.
Wow. That's brilliant.
And so what ends up
With body
happening?
language.
And you can tell,
Talking head.
yeah.
Mhm.
And in fact, there's an entirely different. I challenge you to make to do this experiment. Do a phone call with somebody sitting. Have a phone call with that same person shortly thereafter, and stand. And ask them if they noticed any difference in the conversation. And I would bet big money that they'll tell you there was, maybe they can't put their finger on it, but they'll tell you, well, there's something different about it. And if they really were astute, they'd probably say, well, it was entirely different energy that came across on that. Just like we see people who they turn their cameras off, right? They're on a Zoom call. And even if they had their camera off and they stood when they spoke, it would sound different. It would come across different. So, I mean, that's one of the huge changes. And then the other thing that's happened, think about how people communicate with each other. It's so easy now not to have any kind of face-to-face. So I'm texting, or I'm sending GChat, or I'm sending an email, or whatever it may be. And there's very little face-to-face. I saw a very interesting photographic study that this photographer did, and it was about young people and how they communicate. And it was this whole series of pictures. And they were in different settings. Hangouts, I guess you'd say, that young people go to. The ones I remember seeing, one was a movie theater, and they were sitting out in front of the movie theater, and they were on a couple, like a wall outside the theater. And there were, I don't know, maybe 6 to 10 young people in that group, and they were sitting so close, they were almost on top of each other. But nobody was looking at each other, and nobody was talking to each other. Each and every one of them was on their phone. And they had another picture in that series where they were on a park bench. And this park bench was maybe made to accommodate, I don't know, 4 or 5 people. And there were about 10 kids. They were sitting all over it, on top of each other and everything else. Again, nobody looking at each other, nobody talking to each other. Everybody's texting on their phones. So it makes me concerned about what's it going to do overall to our ability to communicate effectively with each other and be able to be in a position to make a connection. And what happens to that person who needs some help? How would we ever see or recognize that? And to your point about how COVID changed things in our field, because one of our core strengths is psychiatry. And so that the difference that COVID made in the world and what we've seen happen to the rate of depression is staggering. And it's not just older people, but significantly higher degrees in younger people. And you've seen suicide rates escalate as well. And so it's like amazing things have happened in those changes. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that connections weren't made, right? And you didn't have a chance to reach out and communicate in a way that had been normal up to that point in time. And we're still kind of learning how to deal with that.
Yeah. And how we spend our time, our valuable time in life, I think matters so much. And if you're a young, impressionable person, let's say before 25, before the frontal lobes really come and develop correctly, and you're just shoving your face in a screen all day, you're not connecting with people. I mean, this is a new phenomenon. It's 25 years old. This is nothing in the span of time. And now, not just social media and phone obsession, I'm seeing people communicate with AI. They're not even now. It's not that. I mean, it would be great if we still got regular text and regular social media posts. People, I saw your post on LinkedIn and I read it and I thought, oh, I think he really wrote that, right? Like he wrote that and maybe he used AI, but it sounded like you wrote it. A lot of times I can tell whether it's AI now because AI uses this. It's not just this, it's that and that, that. It uses the same kind of structure of language, if you will, to explain concepts. But do you think AI is having another superficial layer, adding another superficial layer on our human beingness and our connection to each other?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's a great question. And I think, many people, at least right now, in many instances, we can kind of tell that AI was involved, at least to some degree, in the composition that was put together. But there are some instances where you can't. And so is that going to continue to be how it develops, where it's harder and harder to be able to tell? And if that's the case, how do you gauge the authenticity and the genuineness of something from somebody if their AI partner, put it together? So I think that it's challenging. It's very challenging. I think it'd become more challenging. You just reminded me of an article I was looking at the other day, and was talking about screen time and its impact on development. And where you're talking about, frontal lobes developing and, maybe before myelinization is completed in the body. They were talking about infants and how there's this trend to stick infants in front of screens, right, as a kind of a babysitter.
Terrible.
And that this prime time, I think they were talking about between the age of 2 and 5, and the amount of screen time, that those children come out in the studies with a much higher level of anxiety. So,
Yeah.
what does that mean if that's an upward trend, and how does that impact what those people are like then in 20 years from now when they're adults? So it's like you said, there's a lot of things we don't know at this point, and I'm hoping we'll discover and be aware of some of the things that we can do, and then have some ideas about how to mitigate some of that to make people a little more be able to lead maybe more fuller lives.
Yeah, we'll go back to connection. I mean, do you think, I mean, gosh, I look at it, and we're from different generations, but one thing we have in common is we grew up without technology,
Right.
and then we got to use and embrace technology in a time where we were more developed. Now, I don't know if parents that give their children devices at a young age want to be on their own social media and doing stuff on the thing, so they just give it to their kids too.
Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit about how you personally would think some of our priorities may need to shift. Maybe we need to use a little less social. Maybe we need to go and connect back with people. You mentioned these psychiatric psychology diseases that are going on right now with young people, and I've seen some of those studies too. I mean, it's astounding. The young males, unfortunately, are committing S at a rate that is very concerning for medical professionals right now.
Yeah.
So, in order to stop this, what would you tell if you were a young person now, or if you had a young person to tell and coach? Let's say you're speaking to young mid Gen Zers, and you're speaking to an audience that is going through psyche. So I'm going to give you your scenario, right? So they're having psychiatric problems, and you've been tasked to speaking to 1,000 of them. What is going to be your table of contents in a speech like that?
So because we've talked about it a couple different times, I think I would try to make the theme of that seeking connection.
Beautiful.
And what are you doing? If you want to just even talk about your specific small circle of friends, what are you doing in your small circle of friends to be able to make that happen? And if you're working at that, so putting your cell phones down, trying to see each other face to face, meeting someplace to be live and in person as opposed to just emailing or whatever. And how are you then taking advantage of that time together? And if you did that, if somebody knew that they could rely upon you, that they could share a confidence with you, that they could tell you about comfortably about anxiety that they had, how much richer might that make that relationship? How much stronger might each individual be in being able to deal with things because of that? And I think that's the other part of this, the danger, I think, of isolation, is that you think that, you're it. you have to shoulder all of that. And if you can't bear up under it, then, not going to happen. And, we have, that's what family is for. That's what friends are for, to be able to help. And when nobody has the strength to just go it alone and stand on their own. So it's, people are made because of the support and encouragement and mentorship and so forth that others give them. So I think that's what I would make the theme of that message, is that that's a investment of time that would come back to you many times over.
Do you think social media and portraying all the good stuff in life has made that vulnerability and even that empathy, going both ways, from the vulnerable person to the person listening that's empathetic? Do you think that the Gen Z crowd is having problems with that because of the dynamic that's going on, the content they're consuming, making life look perfect and rosy, and yet they're feeling dead inside? And they don't want to talk to someone about it because they're used to seeing all these, oh, people are on vacation, they're wearing these clothes, or going to these experiences. I'm not doing that, but I don't want to open up to somebody saying, hey, this is, hurting my feelings, or I feel less than because this is what I'm seeing. Could that have a psychological impact as well, do you believe?
I think it would be hard for it not to. I mean, because if you saw that over and over and over again,
Which is happening.
but that's not how you felt, what's the end result of that?
Depression.
Well, yeah. How do you find a way to mitigate that, or do you just say, "Wow, there must be something wrong with me, because I don't feel like that. That's not what I'm interested in. I don't see myself that way." I think that would, and the thing that's scary about that is, because of where they are in their life cycle, they haven't had enough experience to kind of understand, that's not real. That's not a true representation of things. I'm glad I'm not a young person today. I don't think I would have a difficult time bearing up under it.
Well, Rick, I mean, the thing is we didn't go through on a mass scale the numbers we're seeing, like you said. Sure, we had some anxiety. Sure, we had some jealousy, some envy, some lust, some greed, all the deadly sins, but they've been so exasperated. Now, if you look at greed, envy, jealousy, lust, and I mean, I'm a spiritual person. I don't know if you are, but if we just talk about these attributes in general, the polarization going on with politics, the conversations, now we have 2 Super Bowl shows. Now we have people that are going so far on the right and left of politics. It's a dangerous climate right now to be a young person right now. And even AI memes with fake news. I'm seeing things about celebrities come out, things about politics that aren't even real, but now AI is able to generate an image of this, so it seems real. AI is generating a headline. It almost seems like we're AI's bitch right now. I feel like AI is using us. We're not using AI potentially. But I guess my question with all that is, do you, we're talking about us not having to deal with this. Do you see this potentially being absolutely catastrophic for society? Because when you get, I'm in 44, I don't know how old you are, but whatever, when you get older, it actually can get harder for you, because the more life experience, the more you get beat down, the more you fail. You can either be resilient, but there's still an element of that hurt, losing people, failing, that you have to deal with when you're older. I don't remember feeling a lot of the emotions the young people are feeling when they get our age, and they have to deal with life. That gets a little bit harder sometimes as we get older in some ways. Do you think this is, I mean, just be honest with me. Do you think it's potential catastrophe, or do you think there's going to be a solution? Like, what's the forward thinking? What is your opinion on that?
Oh, what a heavy question. Well, I'd like to be somewhat optimistic about that. And I'd like to think that as time goes on, we'll start to wake up a little bit about what we're seeing and the path that it's leading us down, and become a little smarter about what we can do to help facilitate a more thorough understanding of things, and so that we're not as detrimentally impacted by it. That would be my optimistic hope. I think that, to your point about getting older, while it can make, I think your challenges become different. They don't necessarily become fewer. And maybe you're, because of life experiences, depending on what they were, maybe a little more able to handle them. And like I said, the challenges are different. I mean, usually if you're in your 30s and 40s, you don't have to deal with the loss of close friends and loved ones a lot. Whereas you get into your 60s and 70s and so forth, that's something that happens a lot more frequently. So, what do you do when those people resources, if you want to call it that, are no longer there for you? So I think that the challenges are different. And back to what we're talking about, the impact of COVID and so forth. If you don't know how to make connection and so forth, what happens when you get a little further down the life cycle or life's road, and you don't have some of those connections because you haven't really you didn't develop the skill to be able to make that connection, to be able to rely on people, have that network of people. And I mean network, not like let's go network. I mean that network of close knit people, family, and or friends that are there to support you, depending on the challenges that you have. If you don't have that, if you thought you were isolated before, that'd be terribly, terribly frightening, I would think, is to think that you in today's world with the level of activity and the things you have going on around you, and that you were kind of standing as a solitary person in the midst of that storm, that'd be an overwhelming feeling, I would think.
A little bit about personal development. Did you have you had either a textbook mentor or a real life mentor in your life, or currently, or did you when you were growing in your professional career?
So, couple people through, like, very early on, I had in my management career, had a person who kind of took me under their wing and helped me understand, helped me navigate certain things. I would say, we mentioned Ken Blanchard earlier, and I would say I just had a revelation recently. And he has a book out. It was written by, and I'm going to forget her last name, but I'm so thankful to this person. She wrote this book about Ken Blanchard and about kind of his life's journey. And I read that book, and I never realized how much of an impact he had on my, I guess, approach, philosophy, whatever label you want to hang on it, towards management and people. Because I read that book, I'm thinking, that's where that came from. Or, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. That's no wonder I seem to glom onto that idea. That makes perfect sense, because one of the things I think about him is that he is one of the few people today who walks what they talk. So he was somebody who had a lot of influence on my life. I think maybe more so than I imagined. And I was just very fortunate. I had a handful of colleagues and friends who, when I started my first training consulting business, they were just so open and so sharing and so supportive. And to this day, a couple of them are still some of my best friends. And one particular individual, a guy named Dave Sweet, who I just think the world of, became, in a way, my role model for what integrity is in business. And to have somebody that you know very well, almost profoundly, be that close to and be your role model for integrity, to me always made it a little bit easier than to have an integrity-filled business approach. So I think I'm very blessed when it comes to that, because I had a number of people who were there who, again, talk is cheap, especially in today's world. And it's like, show me the fruits of your effort. And then I'll sit up and take note. And these people all kind of walk their talk. And in today's world, I think that's rare. So I hope that answers your
Yeah, it
question.
does. Have you heard of Jim Rohn before?
Oh, absolutely.
He's one of my favorite speakers. His videos still to this day, you can watch him over. What a great orator. The
Oh, yeah.
storytelling and how he wraps it into principles of goal setting, personal, professional. I just, I tell a lot of young people that I mentor, I deal with a lot of interns. I'm like, go watch Jim Rohn, go read his books.
Yeah.
He breaks it down, this timeless. I mean, I just absolutely love him. But I do think mentors are important. I take a lot of interns in my company because a lot of the high school and college kids want to do content. Something like 60% of them want to be a content creator. Now it's the most. It's like, okay, well, what are we gonna do when everyone wants to be a content creator? What's gonna happen to
Who's going to do everything else?
Yeah, it's like 60 to 70%. I mean, it was a shocking statistic, but I'm here to mentor them, and I love seeing the change. And one of the things I ask them when they come in, I'm like, what's your goals for yourself the next 5 years? None of them have even heard of that before. I'm still shocked that schools don't teach that.
Yeah.
Like, well, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What do you want to be? Kind of take the Jim Rohn approach with them, and it's interesting.
It is very interesting. It's interesting to me that, we have all the statistics about what happens when you set goals, what percentage of people have goals, what percentage of people write them down, what percentage of people actually accomplish them. And yet, they're still, even today, incredibly small percentages. So what that says to me is we're kind of failing at equipping people, right?
Yeah.
For real life.
Educating the youth that how important this is. And I don't know why. I mean, we've known the stats. It's just absolutely crazy. What's one non-negotiable routine for you, whether it's exercise, diet, prayer, meditation? What's the one thing that you do on a regular basis that keeps you going, motivates you?
Well, you mentioned two of them, actually, and one is exercise, and the other is I try to kill two birds with one stone, and that's my quiet time of day for prayer and meditation. So, and I know that for me, I have to do it very early in the morning before anything else happens. Sometimes it's 4 o'clock, sometimes it's between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. It's quiet, it's dark. So you have to be careful when you're doing it. But that's just, without that, I think things kind of unravel for me. And for me, that's been the thing that in some of the most challenging, high pressure times has been the thing that's kept me grounded and ready to be able to put one foot in front of the other to accomplish the things that needed to get done. And I would be lost without it.
Talk to me about accountability, auditing what you have done either last week, last year in your life, the last speech you've given, the last client you've consulted. What is the importance of accountability, and how can we do it for ourselves to make us better humans?
That's a significant topic with me because I think if you look at something that's not necessarily taught, right? I think a lot of times that's not taught. In fact, maybe the opposite is taught. It's like people are given excuses. Well, it's not my fault, or I can't be blamed for that because, or well, that was so-and-so's fault, not mine. And I guess I would say that as it relates to maybe specifically to business, and then you could expand it to life in general, is that I really don't think a client, for example, expects you to be perfect. And if you look at even a lot of the customer satisfaction research that's been done for decades at this point, that they actually, I remember one study in particular, they were looking at customer loyalty. And the assumption at the beginning of the study was that those people who were your customers, who never had a problem, would be far and away your most loyal customers. And they weren't. In fact, they discovered that the people who actually had a problem and that you took care of the problem for them, they were your most loyal customers because they didn't have to worry about if something went wrong, what would happen. They knew what would happen because you already proved to them that it would. And so I think that that's, as that relates to business and accountability, I think that, so when you screw up, you need to step up and take full accountability for it. Sometimes maybe even if it wasn't completely your fault. And then be solution minded. And I think one of the things that I love about our team, and I'm so proud of them as it relates to that, is they are so incredibly solution minded. They don't get all wound up in whose fault it was, what happened, and they just start looking at, okay, we've got a problem. What do we do to fix it? Because we can fix it. I know we can fix it. So let's just go fix it. And that mindset I think is invaluable in today's world. And again, it goes back to, instead of trying to lay blame on somebody else, we have a vendor of ours, and that's kind of how they approach things. It's always somebody else's fault. It's always, this happened or that happened beyond their control. And it makes me think, and they may be the best people out there, but it makes me think less of them because I don't ever hear somebody just stand up and simply take accountability for those things. And I think that that's a characteristic or a character quality that is greatly appreciated when you experience it. But I think, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, we don't experience it anywhere near to the level that we should.
I think it goes back to that vulnerability and empathy too. There's such high levels of emotional intelligence from people. Well, I could talk to you I still could just go on and on. You're so fascinating. I guess we'll wrap it up here, but what are 3 books that people can check out that, whether it's personal or professional or speaking development, what are 3 books that you've read over and over or currently reading that our audience can check out?
So, because we kind of opened this up about supposed to be a communications person, if you're looking at a book, I think that's a very interesting read, and I think it's Presence by Amy Cuddy. And Amy Cuddy, even today, one of the first TED Talk that she gave is still one of the most watched TED Talks. And I think it's interesting because if you watch it, you can obviously tell that she's nervous, but the message that she communicates it and the way that she does is excellent. There's a book that'll be hard for people to find, but and it's by this woman who I wish I knew her when she was in her heyday. But if you're a fan of John Maxwell, who I think is one of our present day era communication gurus, in his book, Many Communicate But Few Connect. That'd be another book that I would strongly suggest for people. But he mentions in his book a woman that he held in very high regard because of her communication prowess. Her name was Sonia Hamlin, and she actually I think she's still alive, and I think she lives in out here on the West Coast. I think she's in L.A. But she had her own syndicated show, but she wrote a book called How to Speak So People Listen. And you heard me earlier refer to 3 questions that every audience asks. I'd love to claim that for mine. That's Sonia Hamlin's work. And I've expounded on it a little bit in some of mine, but she came up with, people are going to ask you those 3 questions. And if you want to become an excellent communicator, if you think about those questions and you work on how to get affirmative answers to them, you'll be a very effective communicator. But that's another one. So again, John Maxwell, Many Communicate But Few Connect, Sonia Hamlin's book. If you search for it, you'll be able to find it. But that's How to Speak So People Listen. And what was the first one that I mentioned?
Patience.
Oh,
Presence.
Presence by Amy Cuddy.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, but that's the other one. That's it.
Was that a quiz question? Did you see if I was listening?
No, actually, I'd love to. You gave me a great shot to be able to flip that around, but no, I just plain forgot. But yeah, I think
Okay.
those are three great books.
Well, we'll definitely put those recommendations out there. I guess the last question I have is, what do you think would make the world a better place? And let's try to stay within your field of communication. What would you, if you were on a stage with millions or billions of people and they ask you, what can we do to make the world a better place right now? Tell us about that.
Paradox of service. And what I mean by that is, if you enter any type of relationship with the intent to serve the other individual, you'll be amazed at what happens as the outcome of that, because what comes back to you will be many times over than what you ever could accomplish by yourself. I'll leave it at that.
That's the soundbite. That was so beautifully said. Well, thank you so much, Rick. Rick, why don't you tell our lovely audience where they can find you and connect with you if they need some of your help?
Yeah, so Rick Davis, email is rldavis at Arbor, A-R-B-O-R, Scientia, SCIENTIA.com. And or you can go to our website, arborscientia.com, and look for us there.
Thanks, Rick. It was a pleasure.
Enjoyed it, Reg, very much.
Thank you so much.